Thanks again for joining us on Fascism on Film. I'm James Kent. I am a writer and I work for the Mountain Times in Killington. And with me is...
Hi, I'm Teal Minton. I'm also a writer and a writing teacher, and here to talk about Federico Fellini's Amarcord today.
Yes. I don't know if a lot of people have seen this movie. Not, I guess of a certain age people have, but
yeah,
in its day, it was really well regarded, kind of one of Fellini's last sort of great masterpieces, I think is what the consensus is. And it's his sort of look back at his youth. He's not specifically a character. I think he's like maybe like I want to say he's like a 13, 14-year-old, and he kind of uses his sort of extended family, his like cousins and stuff. Yeah.
Tita is the adolescent protagonist, but it's a film that covers. It's sort of about a whole town, and there's lots of different characters in the town that it sort of goes between. There's this sort of the central family with this adolescent protagonist and his dad and his grandpa and uncle and mother. They're sort of the central family of the film. And then there's all these other characters that sort of come in and out of that. There's this woman, Gradiska, who's the town beauty, and all the sort of adolescent boys are after her all the time and just whistling at her and stuff. It's almost like a Wes Anderson type thing with all these kooky characters. And there's a guy who talks to the camera and sort of tells us about what's going on in the town at times. Amarcord means I remember in the dialect of Romanian, so it is a reminiscence piece, and it is Fellini looking at this period of Italian history, sort of in the mid-30s here, I think, early to mid-30s.
34, 35, and he was born, for reference, he was born 1920, and so, he was like a teenager, and so that's kind of where any character that would be sort of loosely based on him would be around a teenager during this time. And of course, why we're looking at this film is that it may not be overtly fascist in sort of the type of military aspects that we have come to see in several of these movies. What it is a real depiction in a very sort of Fellini-esque fantasy way, depiction of what he remembers like life in Italy under fascism. And when we get into that part, I find that the movie is endlessly fascinating on sort of the weird little aspects of it.
I totally agree. And we talked about this a little bit, but when I first saw it, I thought, there's not really a lot of fascism going on in this film. And the more I thought about it, I've been conditioned a little bit by a lot of those propaganda films we watch where it's like every scene is explicitly about fascism. And that's not the case here. This is, I would argue, every scene is maybe implicitly or just is touched by fascism in one way or another.
So that's why I found the movie fascinating, is that when fascism is the rule of the day, no matter what your life, you can't escape it. And when I look at the parallels of today, right now, whatever you want to call what's going on in our country, your everyday life is somewhat tainted by it. In a weird way, sometimes for some people, very, very much so, and others less, but it never really escapes your mind at just understanding, wow, how quickly things have changed, and not for the better. Maybe some people think so, but I think a large majority of people are like, huh, what? And that's not necessarily the case with this movie, but again, there's these little things, and I want to call out something at the very beginning, because I know you're going to like throw in a ton of stuff here, but this is what caught me right off the bat with Amarcord. There's a scene in a barbershop.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with all the little narration things going on of the characters in the town, you see a man coming out, and he has just gotten his head nicely like shaven and waxed. And I realized that like there are all these very strong Italian men who were emulating Benito Mussolini.
Absolutely. That was the macho ideal, was to be like Mussolini.
And so I find already just in this little visual snapshot, Fellini's remembering that these people were so into him. And it's like, it reminds me in here, we got, the MAGA hat or whatever the
Yeah.
character that you have to like flaunt in order to show your devotion to one particular side. And this guy, there's never any real mention about this guy as a character. Just it's a thing there, and it's not an accident.
Yeah, there's a lot of characters like that who sort of come in and out, and we realize over the course of the film that they are fascist, even though they're not wearing a uniform all the time. I was thinking about the title of this film, and I think there's something, the title can almost be read as slightly as an accusation, right? I remember what it was like back then, and I believe that what Fellini's doing in this film is sort of, I won't go this far, but it's sort of a critique of Italian culture, and arguing to some extent that fascism is the product of that culture as opposed to something that's placed on it. And so you have this entire town of these people that are basically like infants almost. They're infantilized. They're driven by really base desires like sex and food and things like that.
And farting.
And farting. Yeah, absolutely. The grandfather, but the grandfather is obsessed with sex, right? And farting. And so I think there is a critique of Italian society that's going on here, and it's not so simple as there's good people and bad fascists. It's really not that simple at all, that everyone is sort of involved in this on one level or another. And when the fascists do show up in this film, it's kind of a high point. It's about 45 minutes into the film before they actually show up. And at that point, they have a big parade, a rally, or fascist rally. And you realize in seeing this that the faces of the people who are in the rally are like the teachers and the priest and the cop and all the characters we've seen before. All these sort of average townspeople are actually members of the fascist party and love this and are excited by it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because Italy and Mussolini invented fascism.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Italy also was, it was a very, and I think probably to this day, I mean, I don't really follow Italy that closely, but
Yeah.
it's always been a very macho, machismo centric government and society, and women they had a secondary role in Italy until after World War II. They couldn't vote. I mean, that's another thing. It wasn't like, we didn't get the vote in America for women until 1920. They didn't have the vote, before World War II was over.
Right.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned on that, there's this, the almost, I call it a Sophia Loren type, because she looked a little like Sophia Loren. The town beauty. Well, what you learn afterwards, I mean, again, this play on vanity and being shallow, you just mentioned. Well, there's a whole backstory on her that gets told, but at the end, she goes off and marries a fascist soldier.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, and okay, we'll get into this, but you can almost track the fascism in this film by what excites Gradisca. What gets her sexually excited is fascism throughout the film.
Yeah.
So, yeah, one thing I was thinking, Fellini is sort of saying, here's Italian society and here's how fascism grew out of it. And you mentioned the machismo and the chauvinism and that sort of male role. And I would say that's a component of fascism, but just being chauvinistic doesn't make something fascist, right?
No.
And so, okay, so I really do think this is Fellini's really political film. I feel like it's political all the way through. I was not that sure about that when I first watched it, but I found a quote from Fellini, which I'll just tell you very quickly. One cannot fight fascism without identifying it as that aspect of us which is stupid, shabby, and weak.
That's fascinating. If you have more on it, then go. But otherwise, I want to unpack that for a second.
No, I'll stop there. Yeah.
The scene in the movie when the fascism comes to town, right? The fascists come in and there's the parade and there's a sequence. I can't remember how closely aligned with that is where the young Italian kid imagines a wedding with a Benito Mussolini head.
Yeah, it's part of it. It's part of the same sequence. There's a giant sort of I don't know what you call it. It's like a mosaic made of flowers, and it's huge. It's like 2 stories tall, and it's just a Mussolini face for the parade made out of flowers. And this kid has this little fantasy sequence where this Mussolini head is marrying him. And he says, like, "Do you, young fascist, take this young fascist to be your wife?" Because there's this whole thing about how they have so many young fascists in the town. That's like the hobby for young girls and boys. We have 2,300 young girl fascists. They're sort of boasting about it in this parade.
So the end of this festivities, the night, up on a tower, this music rings out, and it's this anti-fascist.
It's the International, which is the communist anthem.
And so the fascists are upset, and they pick on the one main character they think, and it was him, right, who hates the fascists. And
well, he's an anarchist.
Yeah,
he's an anarchist, and he hates the fascist, and he may have actually put the gramophone up there playing the International, but they suspect him and wake him up in the middle of the night.
So they call him in, and you get the sort of inquisition and somewhat torture session where they down his gullet with castor oil.
Yes,
which he barely makes it home.
Well, and this was a favorite technique. This is mentioned in, I think it's mentioned in The Conformist, but the Italian fascists really liked force-feeding people castor oil. I don't know if you know what that does to you, but
yes, I do.
Okay, so it can cause severe discomfort, dehydration, all sorts of things, but basically what it is a humiliation. And there's a scene early in this film in a high school where they make this tube, and this kid pees through the tube to make it look like another kid peed on the floor. And the teacher sees it, and this kid is humiliated and so forth. And I see the castor oil as being not that much different than that. It's a humiliating prank that makes somebody feel bad about themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of these little interesting things going on that comment whether directly or indirectly on fascism, but there's a couple of things. I mean, it talks about basically how, and you said this thing a few minutes ago about kind of how fascism really, shows the stupidity of man.
Yeah.
And it shows how education becomes a joke, and how religion capitulates into fascism, and kind of the hypocrisy there.
So this is my take on the film. You're getting into it now, which is that it gives us all these domestic situations, right? It gives us the home. It gives us school. It gives us church, all these sort of institutions of social life. And it examines how they are either fascist in and of themselves, the way they're like chanting in school, or the way they're talked to about touching themselves by the church, that there's fascist qualities in all these different aspects of school, church, home. The movie theater is a really big place. It's another place where Gradiska actually gets sexually excited at the movie theater. There's a race car race through the town.
Yeah, the Mille Mille.
Yeah, which is, it's sort of this whole fantasy and celebrity thing. And so the film has it's essentially a series of these domestic settings and scenes that are somehow influenced or infected by fascism. And it starts right at the beginning of the film. The first sort of community activity they do is burning a witch in effigy.
Yeah.
And this is the town spring festival they have every year, and they build a big bonfire and burn this witch in effigy. And there's a guy up on top of the bonfire who's setting up the witch up there, and then he comes down a ladder before they light it on fire. Well, the ladder gets taken away. And this is another one of these kinds of juvenile pranks, right? It's another juvenile prank. Well, the guy who does it, who takes the ladder away, is Uncle Lalo, who is part of this family, and he's also the one who turns the father in and gets him taken away by the black shirts and fed castor oil. And so Uncle Lalo is like this really juvenile kind of bully who's kind of pathetic in his family life, but does these pranks. Then we have the school. I've talked about that. We've talked about the home and the church.
Well, there's another thing I want to talk about another scene. And I know that, we've had an offline discussion about it, but I'm very curious to get into this a little bit more because I had mentioned there was a scene that didn't work for me because of it being so kind of phony and fake, and just from the artifice of the filmmaking. And I felt it was like sloppy, kind of like Hitchcock in his later years, where he was like using rear projection, and it looked bad when times had changed. And you had a completely different take. Now, there's a scene where a bunch of the townspeople, they're going to get into a boat and they're going to go out because they want to see there's this big, they're proud of this big fascist military ship that's going to come by at some point. Right?
It's an ocean liner.
Yeah. Or is that what? Yeah, it was an ocean liner.
It's an ocean liner. It's like, they shout out the greatest achievement of the regime is this giant ocean liner. And the whole town gets in lots of different boats, and they all go out there in these little boats and wait in the dark for it to come by in the night.
Well, the thing about Fellini, and, he's an Italian magic realist.
Yeah.
That I know every one of his films was always shot in Rome at Cinecittà Studios, and none of it's real. And that gives it kind of a weird quality. I think it works a little bit more realistically in his black and white stuff because you don't necessarily notice, like when La Dolce Vita, the famous thing is the Fountain of Trevi. That was all a set. It wasn't really actually filmed at the Fountain of Trevi. It was at Cinecittà. And so here we are in Amarcord, and he's shooting on outdoor and indoor sets there. And so I'm not expecting that when they go out in these boats, it's going to look realistic, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
But there are levels here where the backdrop, like it looks like a painted sky. And then even what's supposed to be water is like big trash bags. And I was complaining to you about the fact that I found it distracting, but you had a completely different take on it.
The take is essentially that it's theatrical, right? That they get out there and then it transforms into this performance. And that by showing us that it's a set and it's fake and stuff, because he could have made it look realistic if he wanted to. This is by choice, because it's really obvious that they're on a set and that the water is black plastic trash bags or whatever. And it gives us this idea that the whole thing is a performance, that it's all theatrical, that it's all false, and that fascism is this big. So when the boat does show up, it's basically just a piece of plywood, like painted to look like a boat, and it's pretty obvious that that's what it is. And so it's the whole thing is sort of a facade, and fascism is this facade that people cheer on, but is actually kind of empty and not really there, and is in essence a fake experience. And to me, this is sort of putting that sequence together with the movie theater sequences, the fascist parade, and how fake that all is, and how even the witch burning, right? They have these ceremonies that are all kind of in effigy, and so the Rex again, the Rex being the ocean liner, is I think showing how hollow and fake the regime actually is. That's my argument on that.
No, and I think that it's a good argument. Again, it bothered me, but at the same time, I get it.
Well, I feel like I didn't really get this film the first time I watched it. It really took...
Well, that's what's so fascinating, because we had lots of earlier discussions, and every time I had mentioned something like an Amarcord, I think you were like, I just don't know if that's really something that even fits in this. And I'm thinking, and I was like, well, I don't remember it so well, but I know it does. And then rewatching it, I was like, yes, it is something. Well, it's a little different than some of the other films we've talked about to this point. I think that's why there's lots of explorations here. I mean, we would run out of things to talk about if we were just like, here's a film that shows you all the little tenets of fascism.
Right. But this film, I actually think, does that, but in a much more subtle way, because it's showing that fascism is sort of a part of their culture in a way, that it's a natural outgrowth of the culture. And we somehow have to find a way to, I think what's good about what Fellini's doing is he's not just saying all these people are bad for being fascist and they're all corrupt and evil. He is looking at it empathetically and seeing like how these sort of infantilized people with their sort of base desires get pulled into this kind of thing. And it becomes kind of this mob activity where the whole town is kind of coming together for whichever one of these events is. It's a funeral and a wedding at the end, or some more town events that happen. Gradiska's wedding wedding where she marries that lame fascist.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is, in a sense, it's a memory of a town and a people
Yeah,
and one period of year, and it's pre-war
yeah.
time. So relatively, if you can live within all these, rules that have been put upon you and adjust, and, these are simple, kind of not peasant folks, but they really, a lot of them are.
They're provincial. Yeah, it's definitely, they're not metropolitan. They're considered sort of, in a small town out in the country.
And again, maybe everybody left pretty much unscathed, but this is sort of the same feeling I had with the Garden of the Finzi Contini.
Yeah,
In these pre-war looks, when I look at these individuals and imagine them as real people and not just film characters, I am filling in not a backstory, but a prologue, and wondering
yes,
what happens to these people when war actually breaks, when they
yeah,
discover that they were let down by fascism, when lives are destroyed at war and other things. Like, I get caught up in these characters, just like that movie that we've talked about in the past, was Special Day. I want to know what happens to those two characters.
what happens to these people? Yeah, and getting back to what I was saying about the title almost potentially being an accusation, is that he's saying to the rest of the country, hey, I remember this. I think they call it the dark 20 years or something, like 25 to 45. He's saying, I remember this, and we were all there, and we all took part in this in one way or another, and we're all culpable, whether we were wearing a fascist uniform or not. We all somehow incorporated this into our lives, and we're all complicit. We're all part of it. We all have some guilt and responsibility for the fact that this grew in our culture to the point where it became the most powerful force in our culture.
And I'm imagining a future season that we're going to be doing. It may not be the entire season, but we'll look at some films that focus on youth and youth under fascism, whether it
Yeah.
be in Italy or in Germany or any other dictatorship, where the characters in the story, all they've ever known is fascism. Imagine that. I mean, that's what
Yes.
Fellini, he was born in 1920. So until there was no more fascism in Italy, that's all he lived under, even
Yes.
though his family was much like the family that you see in the film. They were very anti-fascist.
Yeah. Well, the father's an anarchist, but
Unlike, as we've been revealed this week, Ingmar Bergman.
yes, Ingmar Bergman, as we know, is actually a Nazi.
But that film experience does influence. I mean, a young Godard grew up in a family that supported
Yes.
Vichy.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and again, we see the movie theater in Amarcord, how important cultural images are to these people and how they build their lives around, like having your head shaped to look like Mussolini kind of thing. They really are supportive of the regime. I think that's the other thing here is in this movie, everybody loves the fascists. Except for the father, who's an anarchist. And the father also owns a business, right? He's a contractor. He's like the most middle-class character in this. And yet he's an anarchist and an anti-fascist who doesn't really do anything anti-fascist in the film.
Yeah, I don't think there's maybe even a lot of people there that have like a big education in the movie.
That's the thing, what Fellini said, the part of us which is stupid, shabby, and weak, and that he does see these people as being kind of dumb, right? Everyone in the town is sort of just highly sexualized, and their imagination is limited by the church, and they don't really think much outside the town or themselves, and they have a series of rituals they go through as a community, and those rituals are sometimes around fascism. But yeah, you're right. These people are there is a grain of ignorance and stupidity in them, which makes them malleable, and they're not thinking for themselves a lot. They're just going along with the rituals of the town.
I have one more part of the film that I just want to ask you about. It may not have anything. I'm curious on your take if there's anything fascist related, or if he's commenting on it, or sometimes Fellini, he does these, his movies, they're little episodes and vignettes.
Yeah.
And there's the scene where they go out to visit the crazy uncle who is
Yes.
he's in an institution, right? Or something, or he's
he's in an institution.
And he escapes and he climbs up on this tree and they can't get him down and they can't
It's
figure
just
it
a
out.
hilarious scene. Yeah, he's up there screaming, "I want a woman," and anyone who tries to come up, he throws rocks at them.
Yeah. Do you think there's a comment on there, or this is just a Fellini remembering something?
I think there's a little bit of a comment. I don't think it's as strong as some of the other ones, like the Rex, obviously, but I think there's a comment about sexuality, right? And the repressed sexuality and how he's cut off. He's in the institution. And then to get him out of the tree, a dwarf nun shows up and says one line to him that we don't hear. And he comes down out of the tree all smiling and happy. And so there's something about how strict the church is and how the church runs people's lives also. And how this guy, he's crazy, but he's also a free thinker, right? And so he's one of the people who doesn't fit in the town, which is why he's been taken out and put in this other place. So I think there's a little bit of a comment there about sort of the social aspects, but I don't think it's as strong as something like the Rex.
Overall, if people are looking for something that's just an interesting movie and maybe haven't seen a lot of Fellini films or any of them, this might be an interesting film to start. And then again, if you're just looking like we are on the subject of fascism and to truly get a lot of different looks and think about things in different ways and see how fascism, say, plays out in a town without just all of the military and the people being sent off somewhere,
nobody gets sent off to war in this. Nobody gets kidnapped. Nobody gets disappeared. The most violent thing that happens in the movie is forcing this guy to drink castor oil.
It's a scene where the movie is very funny.
Yeah.
But then there's these scenes where it's dark, and I think that's a segue into the film that we're going to be talking about on our next episode, which does this high wire act of comedy, but then it mixes in very dramatic stuff. It doesn't really hit you over the head dramatic wise, but it's constantly reminding the audience that I just made you laugh, but should you be laughing?
Yeah.
And is this as serious? And there's serious stuff going on, especially at the time it was made. And that's Ernst Lovich's To Be or Not to Be, which if you haven't seen it, you got about a week before that episode comes out. And I really strongly recommend you find it and watch it because I think there's some really fascinating stuff going on in that movie.
I think Amarcord is a masterpiece in a lot of different ways. And I think To Be or Not to Be is also. And they both sort of do a similar thing in terms of showing fascism as a farcical theatrical production.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so there's not it's not a coincidence that these two episodes kind of fall on each other. We do a little bit of matching. And while I wouldn't say this is double feature material.
No, it's actually not double feature material at all.
I would put Mephisto and To Be or Not to Be as a double feature.
Oh, that would be interesting.
All right. Again, this has been Fascism on Film. Teal Minton and me, James Kent. And you can find our episodes on fascismonfilm.com. And we're on Podbean, we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the other podcast things that we've got it. The show's up and running and people have been, starting to hear the episodes. And so we appreciate the support and sort of tell your friends. And what do they say? Hit the like and subscribe buttons and all that.
Yeah,
stuff.
hit the like and subscribe button. I don't know that we have a like button, but definitely subscribe to the podcast.
Well, if you go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe there, then you'll get the episodes when they hit every Monday.
Yes.
But you can like it there and even drop a review.
Drop a review, please. If you enjoy the show, drop a review. We could use it.
And if you're a fascist and think we've got it all wrong, let us know.
Let us know that too.
Okay. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. Go ahead and say goodbye.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were.
I always give you the last word.
Yeah, no, I forgot. Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody.